Welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release, a podcast dedicated to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians who support them. I'm your host, Gail Buell. Today, I'm going to be talking to Chad Caruthers. He's the Partnership and Community Engagement Coordinator for Partners for Wildlife. I know I've been plugging Partners for Wildlife a little bit because certainly this podcast is produced through Partners for Wildlife. And the last episode was with Rob Kulhanek. He's the program manager for Partners for Wildlife. And we talked about the Wildlife Rehabilitation Knowledge Exchange, which is an important component to help wildlife rehabilitators find out information they need. Chad and I are going to be talking about public outreach. And we all do it as rehabilitators. Even if the only public outreach you do is on the phone, it is incredibly important. And it is a form of outreach. And so we take this time to talk about what Partners for Wildlife is doing in this kind of realm and this space and what we're planning on doing. And Chad, of course, is the person to talk to about it. So let's get into it. Hey, Chad, I'm so excited for everybody to get to know you a little bit because I've been able to get to know you now for the past several months. And I wanted to bring the information that we're developing and you're developing for wildlife rehabilitators to everybody today. And I thought this was a great chance to do that. So thank you again for being on the podcast with me. And we're going to start right where I always start, which is with your origin story. So if you want to kind of briefly tell everybody what your background is and how you got to this position with Partners for Wildlife, that would be awesome.
Yeah, Gail, thank you for being here. As you said, we've gotten to know each other quite a bit over the last 9 months since I joined Partners for Wildlife. And, you've been a huge resource for me in terms of knowledge and just make me feel comfortable. So I appreciate that. Definitely excited to be here. I was thrilled when you asked me to join you on the podcast. So you have such interesting guests. I mean, everything. I'm not a wildlife rehabilitator. We'll get to that in a second. And so any episode that I tune into, I learned so much. It's amazing. And the work that all rehabilitators do is something that impresses me every day. So thank you for having me here. In terms of my origin, I'll boil it down to kind of how it led to where I am right now with Partners for Wildlife, being the partnership and a community engagement coordinator. The core of my work has always been business communication, and just being able to apply communication, connect with people, connect with audiences to get the results, whatever they are, for whatever your role and responsibilities are. So there's that. And over the last 20 to 25 years, I've utilized that in the nonprofit space, which really is pretty significant for the role I have right now. Both I've done work on the ground, direct service, street level, whatever you want to call it. And that led all the way up to being an executive director of a couple nonprofits for about 15 years. So, if you take those two components, just the business communication, how I've applied the business communication throughout my career, particularly in that nonprofit space, and it just tees me up well. The other thing, of course, is just the passion for animals. And I mentioned I'm not a wildlife rehabilitator. I do think, if I'm not mistaken, in my actual interview for this role, I did mention that, I'm one generation removed from a farm. So I do spend a lot of time back there and just being engaged with animals, be it pets, other people's pets, the livestock down at the family farm, or just, like everybody else watching a cool documentary. It's something that is always part of my life in one way or another. So just put all those things together. When this role was presented to me, I was like, because I also have a story, Gail. And the story is about 20 years ago, I was working for a youth development program as a staff member, and we created a partnership with the Raptor Center. And, I knew what Raptors were at that time, but that's about all I knew. So we worked with 4th through 8th graders. The Raptor Center would bring their educational programming to our school sites. And you know what? I got to be a little kid in that moment. I got to sit there with the 4th through 8th graders we were with. And just, that look of wonder in their eyes was in my eyes too. And just being able to be up close and personal with an owl, with an eagle, whatever it may be, was something I never thought would happen. And it was just the coolest thing. And then to learn about these animals, to learn about how important they are to our ecosystem and so forth and so on. Really was a thrill. I never forgot it. And I've always had an affinity for the Raptor Center. When I saw this role about a year ago available at Partners for Wildlife within the Raptor Center, I said, let's look at the big picture here. And this is something that I'm
Hmm.
definitely interested in, and I think is something that is a pretty good fit. And we've kind of gone from there. And it's just been really great to learn more about the animal and the wildlife rehabilitation side of things, and to hopefully apply some of the things I know to kind of create this project we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of gone full circle for you. And I remember because I was in charge of the all the ambassador animals at the time that you were in charge of that after school program, and how much fun we had putting that curriculum together and being able to go multiple times, because that we know that that has a huge impact, not only on kids but adults as well, to see these animals. So, well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that, because it's
Yeah.
I always find it super interesting to find out people's background and how they got to where they are. So we're gonna get right into what the public outreach is for Partners for Wildlife, or P4W, you're gonna hear me call it. So as far as in context of P4W, what does public outreach look like to you?
That's a great question because, as you know, public outreach, public contact, all those things, they can mean a lot of different things. They can mean different
Hmm.
things to different people. And as I've been on this journey here the last 9 months, that's one of the things that I've kept in mind. And as I've learned and as I've listened and as I've researched, really starting to kind of narrow it down to how do we, Partners for Wildlife, want to approach it? How do we want to approach it in the context of the PACE project that we'll talk about? One of the first things that I heard, and I keep hearing it from rehabilitators and people who work closely in this field, talking about the work can be really hard, right? The technical skills are there. The passion is certainly there. The desire to connect with the public, to engage the public is there,
Hmm.
but not everybody knows how because I think we've all been in situations where, whether it's work, whether it's life, where we're expecting something into an experience. It is what it is, but there's also a whole lot more that comes with it. And I think
Right.
when you talk about public outreach, and again, these moments can be organic, such as when a finder brings an animal to a clinic, or they can be planned, such as the educational programming we were talking about with the Raptor Center.
Hmm.
Um, but how do we, make these opportunities more accessible for rehabilitators, more accessible for the public, truly a learning and a teaching experience, all to better wildlife stewardship, right? And that's really the approach we're taking with this. And the question, hopefully, that we're answering as we go along this journey is, again, how do we support our rehabilitator network in advancing that wildlife stewardship among their public, right?
Exactly. I 100%, 110% agree with you that people are coming to wildlife rehabilitation with the passion, with the technical skills, with all of that. And they know that they have to learn those skills in order to do rehabilitation to the best possible way that they can. But along with that, whether they want it or not, they have this public outreach piece, and it comes in many forms. It comes in the phone call. It comes in the rare party that you can go to, and you're talking with people, and someone says, "What? You do wildlife rehabilitation? What's that?" Or, "Oh, you're just a bunny hugger," or all the whole myriad pieces of information that you can get thrown at you. I think most rehabilitators understand this. If they don't, they're about to. But all of us, because it's kind of a rare profession, and I'm not going to call it a hobby because there is so much input we have to give to it. Um, it's a profession and we need to treat it as such. And one of the ways that we treat it as such is you have to realize as a rehabilitator, you represent all of us, all of us. So that means if it's something positive that you say on social media, that's one thing. But if you go off on somebody because they held an animal for 3 weeks and it makes you very emotionally sad and you know how tragic it is, that's not helping wildlife rehabilitation as a whole. So we are all representing wildlife rehabilitation as a whole. We have to keep the end goal in mind as far as what we're trying to do. But these are skills that I was taught these skills in my profession as far as being a naturalist and being out in front of the public. So I might come at it a lot differently because I've already have had a lot of training in those skills and keep learning, but a lot of people don't. And so that's kind of where I think we come in as Partners for Wildlife, but a lot of organizations do, right? A lot of organizations try to make sure it's very, very professional. So thanks for kind of giving that little bit of context for Partners for Wildlife and how we kind of look at public outreach through what we're doing. Now, before we get into kind of the nitty-gritty details of your job and what you're doing and what your Partners for Wildlife and your long-term goals for public outreach and things like that, I do want to mention that we have Partners for Wildlife have a 7-state area that we directly boots on the ground work in. And that is kind of the northwestern states in North America or in United States, right? So it's Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, Washington State, and Alaska. But that doesn't mean that we're not trying to figure out ways to reach beyond those 7 states. And I believe that this is one of the areas where we are going to be reaching way beyond the 7 states to help a lot of people. So having said that and having teed that up for you, so the devil's in the details here. So let's talk about PACE and what PACE is and all the details around that, because that's something that you're working on really hard right currently. And let's talk about that.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head, Gail. People have different experiences and bring different skills in these areas to
Mm-hmm.
their work, right? Um, and historically, Partners for Wildlife in our public outreach work that we put out to our rehabilitator network, it's kind of focused on the what, right? What do you say in this situation, or if you
Mm-hmm.
have this experience? And what we're trying to do with PACE is to kind of center it more on the how. And how do you approach these conversations? What is the tone you want to take? How do you center the animal? How do you make the personal connection? How do you take that empathy that you have? How do you share that empathy? How do you embed it into the conversations that you have? Because let's face it, a lot of times these conversations are really stressful moments. So, in and of itself, just to keep your head level, that emotion, whether it be positive, whether it be negative, keeping that on a level scale, because you want to articulate whatever it is that you're trying to share in a way that's meaningful and hopefully impactful, right? And again, that at the end maybe even creates some sort of upstream intervention situation through better wildlife stewardship from the public. So
Exactly.
just taking that approach, kind of the how do we go about these things versus the what do you say. You mentioned our network or 7 states. There are a lot of differences in those states, right? There are differences in the animals that they treat. There are differences in the public that they're working with. There are differences in the
Mm-hmm.
regulators, things like that. So there isn't necessarily a one size fits all, right? And you can't be all things for all people. So really what we're trying to do is, create some skills, a toolkit, if you will, for people to be able to apply it in their own outreach, in their own situations. And that's kind of the philosophy around it. My guiding principle that I've learned, again, through just listening, through research, through talking to people like you and things like that, is that every one of these public contact opportunities is an opportunity to educate. So how do we leverage those to make sure they're valuable for everybody, they're
Mm-hmm.
comfortable for everybody? For a rehabilitator, they can speak with confidence. And again, how do we do this in stressful situations? How do we center the animal? How do we center empathy? Things like that. How do we weave rehabilitators to a person? They have this tremendous knowledge base, right? How do
Mm-hmm.
we take that to somebody, like me, a year ago, who walks into a clinic with an animal? And really what I have is that compassion, that care to actually, you know, take the time to call the rehabilitator to bring the animal in, things like that. But that's kind of where my knowledge stops. So how do we,
Mm-hmm.
I'm concerned about that animal. How do you have that animal welfare conversation? Sometimes outcomes are not what people are hoping for. How do you have those conversations effectively? And that's really the approach that we're taking.
Right, right. Oh, I love it. I love it because you are exactly right. We've struggled with this, and rehabilitators across the millennia have struggled with this, is that we're all doing things slightly differently. I'm an equal opportunity rehabilitator, so I take in everything, but I don't keep it. I triage and transport, so I move it to somebody else that can finish the rehab. So that's the way I do wildlife rehabilitation. But other people, they are focusing on orphans. Other people are focusing on birds. Other people are focusing on the injured or the surgery or those kinds of things. Others are on the reconditioning to get them ready for release. So, and as you mentioned, lots of different species across our 7 states, but lots of different species across the US or across the world or whatever. And so you're right, we can't be everything to everybody. We just can't. You are looking at it, I think, is definitely, I don't want to say innovative, but I think is the way to go to really help as many people as possible meet the situation when it comes up. We know that one of the ways that people interface with finders is by a phone call. It could be an email, sometimes a text. Um, and so that is one interface, right? And those finders are coming with their own set of emotions. We have our own, right? When we have to euthanize something or something dies in our care, I mean, a lot of people feel it as a moral injury, and I do as well. And so, how do you work with that, plus working with a very emotional finder, possibly, and when they bring the animal in or when they find out what happened to the animal, and it's not an outcome that they want, and how do you make it a teachable moment? And not a moment where everybody just remembers the high emotion and that's it. And we want to go beyond that. So, oh, thank you for that. So, PACE, what does it stand for?
So pace, this is we've talked about a few things that it could stand for, but it's all about public outreach. It's all about public connection, public accessibility, and conservation empathy. And
Okay,
again,
say
it's
that.
that
Wait,
I
wait, wait. Say that again. Slow it down. Because I
public.
got to tell you, even at P4W, I'm like, PACE. What does it stand for? What does it stand for again?
Yeah.
I
Yeah. I'll
never
say it.
remember.
I'll say it slowly. I'll say it clearly, and then we'll just refer to it as PACE from now on.
Perfect.
Public accessibility and conservation empathy, right?
Okay.
And I think, if we talk to Rob Kohanek, our fearless leader, and asked him what that meant a year ago, maybe, or 18 months ago versus what we think it means now, they may be a little bit different, right? But to me, it's that public accessibility. It's those moments of contact with the public, right? No matter
Yeah.
what they are, organic, planned, or otherwise, and building that conservation empathy through all of those touch points. And
Hmm.
that really, to me, is what it is.
I'm writing it down.
I've
Remembering
written it
for
down. I actually have it written down in front of me too, so don't worry.
okay. But I think that centering the public in PACE and in the public outreach is is very excellent. I mean, is excellent. It's just excellent. Centering it on the public. Because yeah, we know, right? But we know it's public education. We know, but it generally, when I think about it, before PACE, it would be like it's coming from me.
Yeah,
I'm transferring information. I'm doing this. But when you're centering the public, it is definitely a two-way street.
yeah,
I really like it
yeah.
because,
And that to me is partly where empathy comes in, right? Empathy. We have the empathy for the animals. We have the empathy for what we do and the work itself and the outcomes and things like that. But also that empathy for that person that you're either educating in whatever form, right? And understanding a little bit what position they're in. Like you talk about emotion versus facts, basically. Understanding that a lot of times, you know, we don't. People from the public don't necessarily have the factual knowledge, but they do have that compassion and that empathy for the animal. So,
mhm.
but being able as a rehabilitator, being able as an expert to share some of that knowledge in a again a meaningful way, but also a way that acknowledges those emotions that are part of the situation is crucial.
Well, it is because emotions, we all have them. We have to have them. And emotions actually dictate kind of what behaviors we emote and what we do. And so we know that people coming to you with an animal have some level of empathy, some level of compassion for that particular animal. Um, and and that's important because that's a starting point, right? And yes, we are coming to the situation with our own emotions, but we may have experienced those emotions many, many times, depending on how long you've been in rehabilitation. This may be the very first time for a lot of these finders to have those emotions focused on a wild animal.
Yeah. And how do we make that personal connection in those moments, right?
Exactly. People want to feel valued. People want to feel like they're doing the right thing. People want to feel that what they're doing is not incorrect. So it's like, if they feel shame about what they did or something like that, that's what they're going to go away with. And not, I'm not saying lie. I'm not saying any of that, but I'm saying it's the approach that we use, the empathy that we use as wildlife rehabilitators. Um, Most rehabilitators get into the work partly because they love animals, don't love people so much, which is such a weird thing because we're all human and we're very social. We're a social species. But I hear that a lot, and I certainly have felt that over the years too. But in everything, whether you're in a small animal practice and you're a veterinarian, or whether you're a zookeeper at a zoo, or you're at a nature center and you have ambassador animals, or a place like the Raptor Center that has a hospital, but also has ambassador animals, we are dealing with the general public all the time.
All this.
And the other reason that I think that that's important, not that anybody listening, I mean, you guys all know this, but is really the only couple things is really the only way that we find out about animals that need our help is from the general public. Very seldom is it us coming across an injured animal, sometimes, but most of the time, no. And I will tell you, if we don't have people that are interested in our environment and wanting to save wild places and interested in wildlife being in those spaces, well, there's actually no reason why we should be doing rehabilitation because there will be no place to release these animals, no place to, we'll get too much pushback about them because, oh, they're not worth anything. And we know that that's not true. But we also need to garner that empathy and compassion in the right way from the general public in order to have those wild places. So these animals can go. Okay, I'll jump off my soapbox.
Yeah, no, you hit it on the head though.
Everybody
I
knows all
mean,
this.
yeah,
So
they
yeah.
do. And that's the big picture thinking though, right? So take
Hmm.
these moments of public contact, create a wildlife steward or a better steward, once
Hmm.
they walk out of the door.
Hmm.
And they take that into their own environment and that benefits the animals, that benefits the ecosystem, just like you said. So
Exactly.
it really is a big picture piece.
Right. So public accessibility and conservation empathy. Right? Did I get that right?
That's perfect.
Oh, look at that. I learned
Yeah.
something today. I'm supposed to know this, but
Yeah.
occasionally. So let's dive into that a little bit. What does this look like? What does PACE look like from your
Yeah.
perspective? We're going to get into examples and of what you really want it to look like when this project is, long term. But right now, as you're developing it, what does this look like?
Yeah. So this is, first of all, I want to be, super clear that this is not Partners for Wildlife, P4W, telling people what to do or how to
Hmm.
do it. What we're doing is kind of packaging what we learn. And when I say what we learn, first of all, we have an outstanding, knowledgeable team at Partners for Wildlife and the Raptor Center where we sit and we live, tapping that expertise, right? We have a network of rehabilitators that you mentioned across 7 states that we have many touch points with and are awesome opportunities to, again, listen, have discussions, things like that, to inform this work. We have a specific group that we put together of wildlife rehabilitators that we meet with on a regular basis to help us inform this work. What do we want to do? How do we want to do it? Who's going to help us do it? Right? I am essentially kind of a vehicle for this. I'm taking all these inputs, right? And I'm sorting through some of them and what makes the most sense, what makes the most impact for the most people, and then they'll come out from there, right? And what's going to
Hmm.
come out are various communication channels, talking about blogging. We're talking about videos that we'll create. This podcast we hope to utilize in some form with our pace work. and also live Zoom discussions where people will be invited to sit down and discuss a particular project. And this is something
Mhm.
that P4W, myself, and the program envision happening year over year over year, right? So
Mhm.
we're really excited to, we don't have, the next 3 years outlined exactly what we're going to talk about and how we're going to talk
Mhm.
about it. And that's by design because we want to do, we want to implement, the first phase of it, right? Get that feedback and hear from other people again at those various touch points we already have, and
Mhm.
what makes the most sense going forward, and really make this about rehabilitators, what they're experiencing. We know they would love to talk about the work more and better and things like that. So how can we help people do that, right? And that's really what this is about. It's about empowering rehabilitators to empower the public to advance wildlife stewardship.
Mhm. Okay. So let's dig in slightly because we are, like I said, going to get into examples more explicitly here in a couple minutes. But so you mentioned blogging, you mentioned a few other things. What kinds of, so that's a tool, right? That's a tool to get to the rehabilitators because this is for rehabilitators to help them with the public. So so let's talk about some of those tools.
Yeah, and first of all, I'll give you the example. Our first module will drop in May, right? And with that, we'll push out some of those things that we've talked about, videos and so forth. And what that will entail is more an overview, somewhat similar to what you and I are talking about today. What is this? Why are we doing it? And all those good things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the other focus, and this is more the focus going forward with PACE, is the individual rehabilitators. What are their stories? What has their journey been? You talk about, your own experiences with public outreach and some of the training you've had and opportunities you've had and
Mm-hmm.
where you were and where you are. We want to hear those stories and we want to share those stories. Like many things, storytelling really goes a long way. It goes a long way when rehabilitators are working with the public. It goes a long way when we're delivering a program like PACE. So,
Mm-hmm.
really finding individuals and groups within the rehabilitator space who can show rehabilitators as opposed to us just telling rehabilitators, what this type of thing looks like and how they can use it to advance their own work, advance the sector, and advance stewardship on a bigger level.
Mm-hmm. How do you, or Partners for Wildlife, how are we going to now podcast? Yep, it's one thing to get it out as much as possible, but how are we going to distribute this tool or tools?
Yeah. So Substack, if you familiar with Substack, Gail?
I am. I am.
Good. Honestly, my this is a learning experience too, and that's one thing I love about this job. I get to learn just so much. But using a Substack page, our Substack page, as a hub for all these things, and you talk about our network, and of course that is who we serve, and that's who we design these things for, right? But we hope it's consumed beyond that. So this stuff will live essentially in public on our Substack page, where people can go. For example, in time we'll post the link to this podcast, so people, if they want to click through and listen to this, they can do that. When we drop videos, when we have those Zoom discussions, things like that, they're all going to be accessible ongoing through a Substack page. So we want to make this centralized hub. We want to meet people where we're at. We don't expect everybody to be able to tune into the live Zoom discussion at the moment that it's happening, but we do want to have that tool and those resources available for people when they can access it, right? So everything will be out there. It will live where everybody can reach it when they want to do it. They can share it with their teams. They can use it just as a refresher, as a original learning tool, whatever they want, right? And we want this to be about the real rehabilitators. We want to meet them where they're at in terms of what we produce and how they consume it.
Hmm. So for those rehabilitators that aren't familiar with Substack, are you going to be doing a training on how to access and use
We will, we
Substack?
will, we will, we will make it as clear as possible. And this is part of my learning. How do we do that and how do we connect?
Hmm.
I can tell people right now, and we could do a shameless plug that they can sign up essentially to follow. It's free, our Substack page. And, along with that, they will be notified when certain things are posted or shared and those types of things too.
Mm. So I'm gonna have so Chad's gonna get me that information. Or because I'm part of Partners for Wildlife, I could get that information. We'll make sure that that's in the show notes. So you don't have to like scribble it down right now, like I'm driving and I'm listening. But we'll make sure it's in the show notes so that you can do that, and then you can be informed of
Yeah,
things as they're coming up. So, yeah, it's
great.
not a shameless plug. It's we
It's
want
an
to get this
essential plug.
information out there.
Yeah,
It's an essential plug. It's an essential
exactly.
plug because I want
Exactly.
people to know how to access this. Um,
Yes.
just like the last episodes, we were talking with Rob Kalhanik about the Wildlife Rehab Knowledge Exchange, which is something that we feel is very important for everybody to know that it's available for them if they want to. So this is also going to be something like that. So please sign up. Okay. Okay. So kind of covered where it's going to be housed, how to sign up. Again, check the show notes, and a little bit about the tools. Before we go on to like the devil's in the details kind of thing, anything else you want to add to this point that we haven't talked about that all of a sudden you're like, but wait, Gail, there's more.
Well, I will say, and like we just talked about, this stuff will be out there in cyberspace for everybody, anybody to access, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I would hope too is that if somebody's listening to this podcast, or in the future they have some sort of contact with Pace and what we're doing, that they share that with fellow rehabilitators, with their teams, with the people in their own networks and things like that to really help it grow. Again, this is about, it's one of those things that really is an essential enhancement for the rehabilitation sector, and we're really lucky, Partners
Mm-hmm.
for Wildlife, that we can do these things. And again, we want it to be about the rehabilitators and for the rehabilitators. So,
Mm-hmm.
with that in mind, the more rehabilitators who we can reach, who can participate, who can have input, things like that, the more robust this is going to be. So,
Mm-hmm.
my hope is that, this thing gets some momentum and snowballs organically through the rehabilitator network, which we both know is super strong, super passionate, and always eager to learn. So, and that's what this
Mm-hmm.
is here.
Excellent. And I also just love it. It's public centered, but it is not about telling the rehabilitators you have to do it this way.
Exactly.
I like that because we're all coming with different skills. We're all coming with things that knowledge gaps that we need to gain, and then we can pick and choose what resonates and how we communicate with the public. So uh, amazing. So I know the tools, right? So it might be blogs, it's going to be videos, it's
Yep.
going to be podcasts, it's going to be whatever. But what are the kinds of hows are you going to talk about? Is it with focusing on when you are talking to a finder? Is it when you go out and do a booth program at a hunting focused festival? Or is it what are the pieces and parts of that?
Yeah, and I will say that anything that helps build that bridge between the work and the public is on the table, right? And that's why
Hmm.
we want to have as many voices who
Yeah.
are on the ground doing the work to have a role in this. What are the
Hmm.
best things to talk about, and what are the best ways to talk about them?
Hmm.
Um, you know, and I could say in general, again, we want to empower rehabilitators. We want to empower them to find their own voice and for their own situations. So really kind of crafting a program that's around empathy, it's around storytelling, confident communications, recognizing that there are very diverse audiences that people are addressing and coming into contact with. And again, just building that bridge between the rehabilitator, building it through the public, with our May programming that we'll share, highlighting an individual story, that what public outreach is to that rehabilitator, and kind of like you were talking about, what has their journey been on it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then getting into more, using examples, using individual stories to really share and hopefully educate and inform rehabilitators so they have light bulb moments, right? That
Hmm.
reminds me of when I was in that situation, or, maybe I can apply that approach to this, right?
Hmm.
So that's really what we're looking for. We really hope that people really, there's kind of an enthusiasm that bubbles within them, because as we know, people want to talk about the work, they want to talk about it better,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
there's that foundation there. So what we're hoping is that we take that foundation and help build that house, right?
Right. I love that. Yeah, and you've mentioned storytelling a couple times, and it just resonates because humans are about stories,
Yep.
period. We know
Yep.
this. You know, you may not think when you come home and someone says, "How was your day?" and you
Yeah.
start explaining it, that's a story. That is a story. And we are about it. And we not only as rehabilitators have stories, we have loads of them,
Yeah.
but the finders have a story too. And
Yeah.
sometimes they also need to express that story. And finding ways to help guide that too, I think is very, very important. One of the things I learned as far as a naturalist is concerned is that when we go out and do a program where people will come up and talk to you individually, so not a formal program where you're standing in front of a group and having a PowerPoint or having birds on the glove or whatever, but people are coming up and talking to you, is that you have to learn how to hear the same question 300 times, but hear it and respond to it like it's the very first time you've heard it because it's the very first time they've said it to you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that really to me was a lesson I had to it wasn't a hard lesson, but it was a lesson. It's like you have to show interest in that story because it's valuable enough to that person to express it to you. So anyway, I just kind of hooked into that
Yeah.
storytelling piece because I think it is so, so, so
And
important.
that's a great example of how, when, I hear you, when anybody would hear you, share that, that makes perfect sense, right? But it's
Mhm.
not necessarily something we inherently
Right.
think about, right? So,
Right.
and that kind, in a way, describes pace, right? It's going to be things that people recognize. Rehabilitators will recognize those moments or those situations. Um, and again, that light bulb moment where, oh yeah, and I think, Gail, one of the things that keeps coming to my mind too is the exposure that we have to so many rehabilitators through Partners for Wildlife, some of the events and things like that
Mhm.
we put together. And pace will share things that are very common to across the field, right? And we'll talk about a lot of subjects that really resonate with people, and you start to see these conversations happen. Oh my gosh, everybody experiences this, right? I'm not alone. there
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
there are ways to approach this. There are people who think about it. There are people who have had pitfalls with it, just like I have, things like that, right? And that's one of the things we want to bring to life through pace, is that here's some support. You're not alone. These are things that you all are experiencing, and here are some simple applications or approaches that we think will help you navigate those even more effectively.
Exactly. Well, I think this kind of leads us into, okay, and maybe this is inherent in what already been talking about, but how do you think this actually benefits wildlife rehabilitation and wildlife rehabilitators? We've touched on a few things, but I want to get really more specific about it. I mean, why should I
Yeah.
care? I do it fine.
Right. And I think, for one thing, it's an opportunity. To me, it's an opportunity for a rehabilitator to make their life a little bit easier, right? How do those emotional moments, how do we have those conversations and those interactions that we feel really good about and know that, we've sent somebody or somebody's out into the world with good knowledge and compassion and things like that that can advance wildlife stewardship, right?
Hmm.
And again, with the idea that every public contact is an opportunity to educate, if we truly utilize that to advance wildlife stewardship,
Hmm.
then we have all these ambassadors, and I'm talking about human ambassadors, who are out there that may handle a wildlife situation a little bit differently next time. They may they may offer some people in their lives some of the knowledge that they've learned. Again, those upstream interventions, right? Hopefully it's a little piece that eventually puts wildlife rehabilitators out of business, right? Because everybody knows
Oh, I
so
would love
much,
that, right?
right? And
I would love
the
that.
those
Uh,
unfortunate human interventions don't happen anymore. Things like that, though, right? And so it's really an opportunity to feel good about those interactions in tough moments, understanding, having that confidence, and just that feeling that being more at ease in those tough moments and knowing how to navigate them. And again, using empathy to understand where a finder or somebody is just a novice in whatever way, having them leave the conversation feeling great and things like that. And just upgrading the profession, if you will, making it just that much more of an integral part of wildlife stewardship and the bigger picture. And I think these are all great opportunities. This is tough work, as you know way better than I. The technical work is difficult. The emotional part of it is difficult. and the human part can be very difficult, right? And this is an opportunity to hopefully, start chipping away and just make all those things a little bit more impactful and meaningful in positive ways.
Do you think, and we didn't talk about this beforehand, so this might be a curveball. I don't think so, but some of the conversations that we have to navigate are conversations with folks, be it regulators or not regulators, that say what you do is meaningless. It means nothing. I would shut you down in a minute if I could. And do you think that some of the information and some of the how you can do this is navigating some of those tough conversations?
Absolutely. And, we talk about people have different audiences and, rehabilitators and just regulatory professionals and things like that are certainly part of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what our goal with PACE would be in that situation is that people do feel more comfortable and they can again have that light bulb moment. There is a way. I have a tough regulator. We always have difficult conversations. They think what I
Mm-hmm.
do is meaningless. And through PACE, hopefully they will say, you know what, there are some ways that I can handle this, right? I personally would, consume some of the PACE material and figure out that maybe there are 3 points that I always want to share is why my work is important. That's how I would do it personally. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't tell anybody to do it that way, but there probably are others who would do that. And just
Mm-hmm.
get them in that headspace. This is something that's unavoidable that I have to work with this regulator. It's unavoidable that their opinion, at least when they come to the table, is that my work is meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how I'm going to handle that and have that
Mm-hmm.
confidence. And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it can be easier. It can be more productive to walk in and say, you know what? The disease screening we do and that we share out to the public, that we share with your agency, that's extremely valuable in the context of wildlife rehabilitation and just our ecosystem. Things like that, just those little talking points that as well as anybody are there and just mining them and kind of having them top of mind and knowing how, we feel it would be best to present them.
Boy, when you were saying that, it's back to centering them, right? What is important to them? Because you said disease screening. This is what we do, and that impacts everybody. I always think about, I'm sure I've mentioned it on here before, is logging your phone calls because, especially when you're talking to regulators or others, they have to think about their budgets, and if they have to take public phone calls, you're relieving them of, giving them a free service of taking on a lot of these phone calls, right? And you often are representing the state Department of Natural Resources or Fish and Game Department, whatever, whether you know it or not, or whether they know it or not, because the public generally associates us with
Yeah.
that agency. So I really like that it is again focusing on them and what
Yeah.
they need in the moment to help them,
Yeah.
and that just helps the wildlife, right? Because that's what we want to do is help the wildlife. They want to help the
Totally.
wildlife too. They're just
Exactly.
helping it in a different way.
Right. And how do you present that kind of what's in
Mm-hmm.
it for them? Right. And like you said,
Yeah.
you are the face of wildlife rehabilitation and just wildlife in general when the
Mm-hmm.
public comes to you, right? Or you have that
Mm-hmm.
interaction, right? And again, they may associate you with a regulatory agency, but you are the boots on the ground and it benefits everyone that you guys feel supported and confident and that your work is meaningful. So again, having that conversation and create those light bulb moments in others too, right?
Mm-hmm. So, what is the public outreach for Partners for Wildlife? What are the goals? What would we like to get to if we can with pace and all those other things?
Yeah. And again, I think, for starters, first of all, one of our goals is to have this driven by rehabilitators, right? And what is most meaningful, what has the most impact. I think another goal is just building the movement, right? And getting people to, not only to consume what they're doing, to participate in what we're doing, but to really understand that it is a critical component of the work that rehabilitators do, right? It's informing the
Mm-hmm.
public, kind of paying it forward. I don't know if that's the right term, but that whole just growing the wildlife rehabilitation space to as many people as possible,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, that kind of the idea of the upstream intervention and putting us out of business, right? Maybe that's a
Right.
lofty goal. It probably is. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, looking at it through that lens, that this work really matters, that rehabilitators, they're doing these things anyway. So here, we want to make sure that they can do it more effectively, right?
Hmm.
More effectively for their own work, for their own well-being. There's a lot of burnout, a lot of turnover, things like that. So how can this address some of those components too? And again, at the end of the day, it is about that wildlife stewardship, making sure we have as many ambassadors possible. What are the best means to get to that end?
And when you're talking about ambassadors, because when I think of ambassadors, I
I
think
know.
of education
Human,
animals,
human ambassadors.
you're talking about other humans, right? That
Yes,
they can
yes.
carry on our work, not necessarily in wildlife rehabilitation, but they can say, hey, wait a second, there's this, um, and it's not just about the individual animal, right? It's about how you decide to plant plants in your yard or
Yeah,
decide on voting in your community whether or not to have a park that has rain gardens or a bigger discussion on whether or not a bigger piece of infrastructure gets placed next to a wildlife management area or whether it doesn't. Those kinds of things. That's to me, that's what I want those human ambassadors to help us do, is to
for
care for
sure.
the individual, but really spread it out and think bigger picture.
And
Um,
in these moments where we're having these conversations, again, whether they're organic, whether they're planned, whether they're formal, informal, it's highly likely that you have a very captive audience, right? And you mentioned things like, what do I plant in my yard? You have that conversation, you have that captive audience, they're probably going to respond favorably to that, right? Kind of the
right.
more I know approach. So, again, rehabilitators have tremendous technical expertise, tremendous compassion, and just understanding.
Hmm.
How can we, in those moments, help transfer that to people who want to do the right thing?
Right, right. Wow, this has been, and I thought I knew a lot about the public outreach part of Partners for Wildlife. I was mistaken. I
I
am
mean,
so
I'll
happy
just
you're here.
say, yeah, and again, I'm glad to be here. And I'll just say to everyone listening that, Gail and I literally work,
Our
there's a
cubicles are right
small
next to each other.
wall, yeah,
Yeah.
right between us.
Hmm.
And we have a lot of impromptu conversations. And typically it is Gail sharing some of her
Interrupting
tremendous,
you. Yeah, interrupting your work. Hey, Chad.
they're happy
All
interruptions,
the
and
time.
just sharing her knowledge about wildlife, and but just about what the experience of being a real rehabilitator is. And it's not like she comes over and let me tell you about the experience of a rehabilitator, but through these stories and this knowledge, I've learned so much, just about the human side of it, right?
Hmm.
And it's been tremendous for me to kind of try to fuse these things and to really understand, okay, what are the human pieces in it? How do we leverage those for all they can be for the betterment of wildlife
Hmm.
stewardship? And it's pretty cool. And what, as we continue on, if we have this conversation again in a year, where I am then compared to where I am now is going to be tremendous. And it's going to be because of you. It's going to be from other rehabilitators, sharing their stories with me and so forth. And that's what's exciting. And I think that parallels hopefully what rehabilitators will gain from PACE is that, where they are now, where they are once they start this journey with us, and where they are a year from now, hopefully 2 or 3 years from now, you
Right,
know, it's an amazing advancement for them, for their practices, and for the animals in their that they treat, and also just in the environment.
right. Well, I'm certainly very excited and happy to be involved with this project because I think we need more of this in the space. And I'm glad it's going to be a resource, a great resource, and one that continues to grow, right? And continues
Totally.
to be a resource and meet people where they're at, and also maybe help navigate some of these whether it's new technologies coming through like AI or
Yeah.
social media and there's going to be more. There's going to be different things coming down to meet us, and we need to be able to have the tools to meet our people or our interfaces with the public in lots of different ways. So
Yeah.
this was a great way to end, but any last takeaways or thoughts you have?
Yeah. I've alluded to it previously, but, rehabilitators hope they recognize, and I know they recognize, but are really conscious, their knowledge and their passion, those are really their superpowers, right? Speaking with confidence, building trust in your own voice, that resonates with people. That creates that personal connection, right? And that's what we're looking for. And
Mhm.
again, being able to use these public contexts as an opportunity to advance wildlife stewardship, send those great human ambassadors out into the world. That's what this is all about. The knowledge, the passion, those are the means to the end of accomplishing this. So you all already
Mhm.
have these. So we look forward to going on this journey with you. And yeah, thank you, Gail.
Perfect. Chad, thank you so much. I learned a ton today.
Yeah,
So I
thank
really,
you.
really appreciate your time and thank you again.
Thank you, Gail. Appreciate you. And thanks to everybody who's listening here. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Chad Caruthers. He's the Partnership and Community Engagement Coordinator for Partners for Wildlife. Thank you so much for coming on today's podcast. Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release is a production of Partners for Wildlife, working hand in hand with wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians to support them to improve the welfare of orphaned, ill, and injured wildlife. Our executive producer is me, Gail Buell. I'm the Partnership Coordinator for Partners for Wildlife with the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. Our producer is Reese Rosado.